The first note showed up on my doorstep like a snake in my mailbox, coiled and waiting to strike. I hadn't even finished my morning coffee when I saw the envelope, unmarked, just wedged there under the handle. I knew it wasn't junk mail. It had that kind of hostile energy you can feel before you even open it. The paper inside was thick, almost like it had been carefully chosen for dramatic effect. On it, scrawled in all caps with aggressive red ink, were the words, "Your fence violates HOA guidelines. Fix it or face fines." No name, no greeting, just pure venom. But I didn't need a signature to know who sent it. Everyone in the neighborhood knew. It had Karen written all over it, not literally, but in every other way. Karen lived 2 houses down, right at the corner lot. She wasn't technically on the HOA board, but she might as well have been. She strutted through the neighborhood, like a small-town sheriff, handing out unsolicited advice and warnings, clutching her dog-eared HOA rulebook like it was the Holy Bible. When I moved in 6 months ago, I was warned by the previous owner. "Just stay on Karen's good side," he said, shaking his head as he handed over the keys. "Or she'll make your life hell." At the time, I laughed it off. I thought, how bad can a nosy neighbor really be? I had no idea that I was stepping into a suburban war zone. Karen didn't just follow the rules, she lived for them. She weaponized them. And apparently, my fence had just become her next target. Here's the thing. My fence wasn't anything special. It was a simple, wooden, privacy fence around my backyard, built by a licensed contractor I found through the HOA's approved vendors list. The planks were vertical, spaced evenly, and the entire structure was no more than 4 feet tall. I'd even double-checked the guidelines before starting. It wasn't some towering monstrosity or an eyesore. It was neat, clean, and matched. The warm brown tones of my house trim, like dozens of other fences in the neighborhood. So why the sudden outrage? Because it was new, and because Karen hadn't approved it. That's all it took. That evening I stood in my yard, staring at the fence, wondering what in the world could possibly be wrong with it. As if summoned by the tension in the air, Karen appeared on the sidewalk, walking her little white terrier named Muffin. She wore her usual get-up, oversized sunglasses, a pink sun visor, and that smug, almost delighted expression she got whenever she was about to enforce one of her rules. "Evening," she called, pausing by my mailbox. I gave a polite nod, but didn't speak. I wasn't in the mood. "You got my note, I presume?" she added, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I bit the inside of my cheek. "I did," I said. "But I'm not sure what the issue is. The fence complies with the guidelines." She laughed. One of those short, sharp laughs that wasn't really about humor. "Does it? Well, I'll be the judge of that." "You're not on the board," I replied, more bluntly than I intended. Her eyes narrowed, and she held up a dog-eared copy of the HOA rulebook like she was holding a badge. "Page 7, Section C. No vertical planks over 4 feet. I measured. "Them myself," I said. "They're 3.8 feet. Karen raised an eyebrow. "I'll be measuring it myself just to be sure." She turned and walked off without another word, her little dog prancing at her side like they'd just won a courtroom case. The next night, just after dusk, I caught her creeping into my yard. She probably thought I wouldn't notice, but I was watching TV when I heard the gate latch jiggle. I peeked out the window and there she was, Karen, standing in my backyard, tape measure in hand, flashlight clenched between her teeth, squinting as she tried to measure the height of a fence post. I opened the door and called out, "Can I help you with something?" She flinched, startled, but quickly composed herself. "Just doing a compliance check," she said, like she had every right to be there. "You're trespassing," I said, stepping outside. She scoffed. "It's my responsibility to protect property values in this neighborhood." "No, it's not," I said firmly. "And unless the HOA sent you, you have no right to be here." Karen didn't respond. She gave one final glance at the fence, muttered something under her breath, and marched off into the night. Her little flashlight beam bounced wildly as she walked, casting shadows across the yards like a scene from a cheap horror movie. The next morning, I found another note. This one was typed and far more official-looking, complete with the HOA letterhead and a request for me to appear at the next board meeting to discuss a potential fence violation. I sighed and leaned against the counter. This was clearly Karen's doing. She was relentless. She'd managed to get the board involved now, or at least one of her cronies on it. I wasn't just annoyed, I was genuinely confused. I had done everything by the book. I had the permits, the contractor's invoice, and even the HOA's prior approval email for the project. Yet here I was, being dragged into suburban bureaucracy because one neighbor had made it her mission to ruin my week. But as frustrating as it was, something about Karen's obsession with my fence didn't sit right. Why was she so eager to tear it down when her own backyard looked like Fort Knox? Her fence was massive, at least a foot taller than mine, and darker, like she'd stained it in secret to avoid detection. Suddenly a thought occurred to me. What if she was hiding something, or breaking the very rules she loved to enforce? That was the first time I really looked at her fence, not just passed by it but studied it. And when I did, a strange satisfaction began to build. If Karen wanted to start a war, she might have just picked a fight with the wrong neighbor. Karen didn't stop at the note, of course. That wasn't her style. A passive-aggressive letter was just her opening salvo, her way of declaring war, without actually knocking on your door and yelling about shrub height or mailbox color. But Karen? She was a follow-through kind of person. She wasn't happy unless she saw the full extent of her influence play out, preferably with an apology or a tearful confession from her victim. The day after I confronted her sneaking around, with a tape measure, she escalated. I received an email from the HOA with an attached complaint, complete with time-stamped photos of my fence from multiple angles. The pictures were clearly taken from behind the bushes near her property line. I could even see the corner of her stupid pink sun visor peeking into one of the shots, as if she was so eager to catch me in the act that she didn't bother cropping herself out. The HOA's message was polite, of course, they always are. Neighborly is their brand. But I could practically hear Karen's tone in the phrasing. We've received a report that your recent construction may be in violation of architectural guidelines. Please review the attached photos and be prepared to discuss compliance concerns at our next meeting. I sighed and stared out the window. My fence looked the same as it always had, brown, neat, boring, and solidly within the limits. But Karen had decided it was a threat. And when Karen decided something, she didn't back off until she'd won, or thought she had. Later that day, I heard a knock on the door. Not a friendly tap-tap, but a sharp, demanding rap. I opened it, to find Karen on my porch, holding her laminated HOA rulebook like it was a court summons. She had a clipboard in her other hand, her lips pursed in that permanent scowl she wore like makeup. We need to talk about your fence, she said, stepping 1 foot onto my doormat like she was trying to claim the territory. I crossed my arms. Is there a reason you're handling this personally and not letting the HOA board deal with it? The board is busy, she said briskly, flipping to a dog-eared page. I'm just trying to save you time and fines. She jabbed her finger at a highlighted section. Page 7, Section C. No vertical planks over 4 feet in height. I know, I replied. Mine are 3.8 feet. I measured them before we built it. She narrowed her eyes. Maybe your contractor measured it wrong. I've seen a lot of these jobs done sloppily. Doesn't hurt to double-check, right? I had to bite my tongue. She wasn't asking me to double-check. She was threatening to do it herself. Then she glanced behind me into my living room, as if hoping to spot some sort of fence blueprint lying on the coffee table. I resisted the urge to slam the door right in her face. I'll be measuring it again this evening, she said matter-of-factly, clicking her pen and writing something on her clipboard. For your benefit. For my benefit, I repeated, voice flat. Karen smiled, all teeth and no warmth. You'll Thank me later. That evening, I sat by my front window with the lights off and waited. Sure enough, just after dusk, she came sneaking back. Same outfit, same flashlight, same tape measure. She crept up to the side of the fence like a cartoon villain, ducking low and whispering to herself. She extended the tape vertically along one of the planks and squinted at it under the weak glow of her flashlight. She stayed out there for nearly 20 minutes, measuring different sections, muttering under her breath, and occasionally jotting things down in that clipboard of hers. I watched in disbelief, equal parts furious and amused. If she spent even half this energy on something useful, she could have run for mayor, or organized a charity, or written a novel about a bitter neighborhood enforcer named Karen who loses her mind over lumber. The next morning I woke up to a flurry of neighborhood gossip. My phone buzzed with texts from other homeowners. Karen's been complaining about your fence at the community center. Did she really accuse you of trying to hide a hot tub installation behind that fence? Why is she telling people you're running a dog training business from your backyard? Apparently, Karen wasn't satisfied with just accusing me of a minor fence height violation. She was building a case in her head, a full-blown conspiracy where I was some kind of HOA outlaw threatening the sanctity of the cul-de-sac. A few neighbors even stopped by. "Hey, just so you know, Karen asked me to take pictures of your fence from our yard," said one woman I barely knew, shrugging uncomfortably. I didn't do it, but she's really determined. I thanked her, then closed the door and leaned back, against it, letting out a slow breath. Karen wasn't just being annoying, she was trying to wear me down. Death by 1,000 cuts. She wanted me to cave, to apologize, to tear down the fence just to shut her up. It wasn't even about the fence anymore. It was about control. She needed to feel like she ran the neighborhood. That's when it hit me. If she was this obsessed with my tiny legal fence, what about her own? I remembered walking past her backyard shortly after I moved in. I didn't think much of it at the time, but her fence had always seemed unusually tall. Taller than mine, definitely, and darker. I assumed it was older, maybe grandfathered in. But what if it wasn't? What if she was projecting? People like Karen often did that. Picked on others for the very thing they were guilty of. She was so desperate to make everyone else follow the rules, maybe because she wasn't following them herself. So, I grabbed a notepad, pulled out the HOA guidelines, and took a walk past her property. I didn't need a tape measure. I could tell just by looking. Her fence towered over mine, at least 5.5 feet, and it didn't match the wood stain color approved in the handbook. More importantly, I had never seen a permit posted during construction, and I remembered hearing the telltale sounds of hammering months ago. Could it be she put that fence up? Recently, quietly, and without approval? Suddenly, her obsession with mine made a lot more sense. If someone started scrutinizing fences, hers would be the one getting flagged. Maybe she thought the best offense was a good offense. If she could call attention to mine, no one would look too closely at hers. But now, they would. And I was going to make sure of it. I'd had enough. After days of pettiness and thinly veiled threats, I decided I wasn't going to just sit there and let Karen railroad me. If she wanted to play HOA cop, fine. But she wasn't going to be the only one holding a flashlight and clipboard. So I turned the tables. I started digging. The first thing I did was comb through the HOA rulebook myself. Not the warped, laminated one Karen weaponized like scripture, but the actual digital copy emailed to all homeowners when we moved in. It was tedious, written in overly formal legalese designed to put you to sleep. But I read every word, highlighting key sections and bookmarking areas that applied to fencing regulations. What I found confirmed what I already knew. My fence complied. Height limit? 4 feet max. My planks were 3.8. Stain color? Approved natural wood tones or house-matching neutrals. Check. Design? Vertical planks permitted, spacing uniform, structural supports on the interior. Everything about. My fence was textbook. So, if I was in the clear, what about Karen? I took a long walk around the neighborhood that evening, phone in hand, pretending to be chatting with someone while I quietly took photos. I tried not to look obvious, casually, pausing in front of Karen's massive backyard fortress. The closer I looked, the more suspicious it became. Her fence wasn't just tall, it loomed. Easily over 5 feet, maybe even closer to 6. It was built like a barrier you'd see around a celebrity's estate, not a suburban backyard. Thick, dark-stained panels, zero visibility, and not a hint of age. The wood looked too new, too perfect. I remembered passing by her place 3 or 4 months ago and hearing construction. Saws, hammering, the usual symphony of a weekend home project. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. People fix up their yards all the time. But now, I realized, there had never been a notice. No approved by HOA sign, no temporary permit posted in her window like required. That was the spark. I went full detective. The next morning, I logged onto the city's property permit portal. Most homeowners never even think about this kind of thing, but it's public record. You can look up any registered construction permit by address. I typed in Karen's house number and waited. Nothing. I refreshed. Still nothing. No fence permit, no alteration request, no mention of any construction activity in the last 2 years. Then I searched the HOA's own archives, our HOA for all. Its faults kept a decent digital footprint. I scanned meeting notes, variance approvals, and architectural reviews. Still nothing. Karen hadn't submitted any kind of application or request for a new fence. I sat back and smiled. She had built that fortress completely off the books. No permit, no board approval, no neighbor notifications, and she had the audacity to harass me over a legal fence. I wasn't even angry anymore. At this point, it was almost funny. The queen of the rule book had broken the biggest rule of all: unauthorized structural modification without HOA review. And unlike her petty complaints about my fence being 0.2 feet too tall, which it wasn't, this was a serious violation. The kind that came with actual fines, required teardown, and public embarrassment if brought before the board. I gathered everything, photos from multiple angles, the city record showing no permit, screenshots of HOA documents with no mention of her name. I even pulled a map of her lot lines to show how the fence encroached slightly onto the greenbelt easement, another big no-no. It was a rock-solid case, and honestly, it felt good having something real, not just to clear my name, but to finally expose the hypocrisy that everyone else on the block just rolled their eyes at. I submitted my report to the HOA anonymously, attaching every file and citing each regulation. I knew they'd take it seriously. Karen had overstepped in a big way, and she'd done it while painting herself as the ultimate enforcer. Her downfall wasn't just inevitable, it was deserved. Still, part of me braced for pushback. Karen had friends on the board, people she'd charmed or pressured into silence over the years. But even they couldn't ignore what I'd sent in. It was too clear, too detailed. The fallout came quicker than I expected. Within a week, the HOA sent out a newsletter with a new reminder about proper permit procedures. It didn't name names, but everyone knew. A couple of days later, I saw 2 board members walking the perimeter of Karen's property with clipboards and measuring wheels. They weren't there for a stroll. Then came the official notice. I didn't get to see it directly, but the gossip traveled fast. Karen had been cited for unauthorized construction, unpermitted structural modifications, and encroachment onto common property. She was given 30 days to either apply for retroactive approval or dismantle the fence entirely, only she couldn't get retroactive approval. Her fence broke too many rules: height, location, materials, you name it. It wasn't just non-compliant, it was wildly illegal by HOA standards. That weekend, I saw something I thought I'd never see. Karen, in her backyard, tearing her own fence down piece by piece, No crew, no contractors. Just her, her visor, and a crowbar. She worked slowly, almost bitterly, pausing every few minutes, to glare in the general direction of my house like she somehow knew I had something to do with it. Maybe she suspected. Maybe she just couldn't believe someone had the guts to challenge her. Either way, I didn't care. I stood in my yard sipping iced tea, my perfectly legal fence standing proud and untouched. Every plank in place, every measurement, just right. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance. For once, someone held Karen to the same rules she'd spent years forcing on everyone else. And the best part? I didn't even have to raise my voice. Just a little research, a little patience, and the truth. Watching her dismantle that oversized monstrosity of a fence felt better than any petty comeback ever could. Because now the whole neighborhood knew Karen wasn't above the rules. And from now on, maybe she'd think twice before sliding another red ink note under someone's door. It had been 2 weeks since Karen began dismantling her fence, and the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, quieter, almost like some invisible tension had been cut from the air. I wasn't the only one who noticed. People had started joking about it during dog walks and driveway chats. Kids played a little louder, music drifted from patios again, and neighbors who had previously tiptoed around HOA drama started reclaiming their peace. And Karen? She was noticeably absent. Her usual daily patrols had stopped. No more striding through the sidewalks with that oversized sun visor and clipboard. No more sniffing around people's yards or peeking through hedges pretending to check for overgrowth. Her little white dog Muffin still got walked, but now it was by her husband, Greg, a quiet man who rarely spoke above a whisper and looked permanently exhausted. The transformation of her property was both literal and symbolic. With each board she took down, her fortress shrank. You could finally see into her backyard now, which turned out to be surprisingly plain. A small garden, a patio with a faded umbrella, a cracked bird bath. Nothing scandalous. Nothing to justify a 6-foot privacy wall that made her house look like it was guarding state secrets. I couldn't help but watch the progress. Every morning as I drank my coffee, I'd glance across the street and see the next panel missing, the next pile of dismantled wood stacked in the driveway. She tried to do it at odd hours, like early morning or near dusk, probably hoping to avoid attention. But in a neighborhood this nosy, there was no hiding. Somehow, though, I didn't feel smug. At least not anymore. What had started as a deeply satisfying turn of events was shifting into something else. I wouldn't call it guilt. Karen had earned this. But it was something adjacent. A recognition, maybe, of how hollow her life must have been if she'd put this much energy into policing fences and lawn heights. Still, I didn't let that soften the truth. Karen had harassed me, lied to the HOA, and made a show of trying to humiliate me publicly. And she did it while standing behind her own lie. Whether it was projection, delusion, or arrogance didn't matter. Actions had consequences. She just wasn't used to being the one who faced them. A few days after the teardown was complete, the HOA sent out another notice, this one openly acknowledging the violation and reminding residents about due process. There was a subtle message woven between the lines, though, a statement that said, "We know what happened, and we're watching now." Karen wasn't named, but everyone understood. The Queen of Compliance had been dethroned. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured Karen would retreat permanently, lick her wounds, maybe move eventually. But one afternoon she rang my doorbell. I opened the door slowly, unsure what to expect. She stood there in her usual pressed khakis and visor, holding something wrapped in foil. Muffin sat by her feet, surprisingly calm. "I brought banana bread," she said flatly. I blinked. "Sorry?" She exhaled like the words were physically painful. I said, "I brought banana bread. I bake when I'm stressed." I couldn't hide my confusion. "Okay, thanks." Karen stared at me for a second longer, then shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know we haven't exactly seen eye to eye. That was the understatement of the century. I may have been overzealous, she added. Her voice dropped a bit, and she looked away as she handed me the foil-wrapped loaf. Maybe I've been too focused on the rules, but I only ever wanted to keep the neighborhood nice. I nodded slowly, still holding the banana bread like it might explode, she continued. When I moved here, it felt like a sanctuary. I wanted to preserve that. But somewhere along the line, I started confusing control with care. Now, that surprised me. Actual introspection. I didn't expect that from her. I'm not saying I was wrong about everything, she said quickly, defensive reflex kicking in. But maybe I should have looked a little closer at my own backyard before judging everyone else's. There it was, as close to an apology as I was ever going to get. Karen, I said, you gave me hell over that fence. She didn't argue. She just nodded. I know. And you built a bigger, darker, more illegal one the whole time. Another nod. I know that too. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Finally, I stepped aside. Want some coffee? She looked startled, like I'd just offered her a winning lottery ticket. Then she nodded again. Sure, why not? We sat on my back porch, sipping coffee in awkward silence for a bit, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She commented on the garden I'd planted next to the fence, and I told her about the squirrel that kept stealing my tomatoes. It was surreal. After about half an hour, she stood to leave. Thanks, she said, for the coffee and, not rubbing it in. I smirked. I considered it. Karen actually laughed, a real one. See you around, she said, and walked off down the sidewalk with Muffin trotting beside her. That was the last time she ever brought up fences, or rules, or citations. In the months that followed, things slowly normalized. Karen kept her distance, but not in a hostile way. More respectful. She started attending HOA meetings quietly, listening instead of leading. She smiled more, though it always looked a little practiced. Still, effort counted. And as for me, my fence remained exactly where it was, legal, strong, and a small symbol of standing your ground when it matters. It wasn't just about wood and nails anymore. That fence had become something else, a line, drawn not to divide, but to say, this is where I stand. This is what I'll defend. And in the end, it wasn't just Karen's fence that came down. It was her grip on the neighborhood, her chokehold on compliance, her reign of passive-aggressive terror. Sometimes, karma doesn't need to come fast or loud. Sometimes it just needs a measuring tape, a little patience, and a neighbor who knows when enough is enough.